overruled, Judge, or is it overcooled?
Are you, like, working with any white rappers?
Court trials. Everyone's favorite half of Law & Order.
Have you been reading God's mind?
I am God. The animation industry has seen its fair share of court cases in the past, and I'm here to talk about some of the hottest hits of that bunch. And speaking of hits, in 2006, Cartoon Network debuted Class of 3000, a show about kids learning the pillars of the music industry, such as collaboration, experimentation, and
plagiarism.
And whether or not that last episode was actually about plagiarism, it'd be that last lesson that come to fruition. In court! In 2008, a Boston postal worker named Timothy McGee sued Andre 3000 and Cartoon Network for stealing his idea for a show. McGee claimed that in 1997, he had approached former Cartoon Network Vice President of Programming Michael Lazo at his local IHOP to pitch a show. No, this whole thing, like the proposal, the subsequent rejection, none of that happened in IHOP. That all happened over mail. IHOP just makes for more interesting backgrounds. IHOP, please sponsor me. The pitch? The Music Factory of the 90s. A much more severely dated name than Class of 3000. Music Factory had a colorful cast of characters that, in McGee's own words, consisted of a young corporate type that dreamed of being a music producer, a tough, full of attitude female executive, a young techno-whiz sound engineer, a talented young Asian singer, and a central, energetic young singer-rapper. A cast that was incredibly original for a 90s cartoon. The show is set to be in Atlanta and feature various musical artists playing themselves, with a live-action segment of them at the end, a la Jackie Chan Adventures.
This interview is because of the movie The Incredibles.
Why?
It starts off with the interviews. The superheroes are giving interviews. The wife got a big butt.
Acting as the host of these hijinks would be none other than Kenny Babyface Edmonds. And as sure as Babyface closes his eyes, Lazo rejected this hot-ass pitch. Regarding the copyright infringement lawsuit, McGee sought reparations in the form of all profits from the show, the cost of legal fees, and whatever else the court thought was owed him. In 2008, when this lawsuit had been filed, McGee's attorney stated that they had already requested $2 million in damages. So, did McGee and his attorney get the reparations they so desperately sought? No. To feasibly prove that copyright infringement has occurred, two things must be established. One, there must be ownership of a valid copyright. And two, proof that copying of the original elements of said copyright had occurred. Regarding the first aspect, Timothy McGee did in fact hold copyright. So that's 1 point for him. But to get that second point, two things would have to happen. For one, McGee would need to be able to prove that Cartoon Network and Andre 3000 had copied protectable elements. For those of you unversed in law, such as myself, there are 3 elements required for something to be copyrightable. First off, you need to have fixation. And I don't mean like how I have a fixation on why did the number on girl's hand go down? But regarding copyright law, fixation refers to whether or not the work is in a tangible medium, such as an audio recording or a physical or digital writing. In McGee's case, he had his drawings and the original treatment he had pitched. Secondly, to be viable for copyright protection, the work must be an expression of an idea. What this means is that the general concept of an idea cannot be copyrighted, but the specific usage of an idea can be. For example, the idea of a disgruntled American with smoking issues isn't copyrightable, but Solid Snake, Naked Snake, Venom Snake, and Iroquois Pliskin are. And last but not least, the work needs to exhibit originality. Originality is met when the work has at least a modicum of creativity and is the independent creation of its author or authors. For McGee's case, he vaguely claimed that Class of 3000 shared overly close similarities in location, characters, content, format, and dramatis personae. In the opinion of the court, none of these aspects exemplified direct copyright infringement. The only main similarities found were that both shows were set in Atlanta, involved the music industry, and had main characters leaving their jobs to take on something new. As such, most of these concepts failed to meet the expression clause in copyright. It's like trying to claim copyright infringement because someone had cowboys in their show, or they had a pop-punk band where the frontman is a groomer. These ideas are too general. The court also found that some aspects of the two shows were polar opposites, such as the themes and the main characters. Class of 3000's Sonny and Music Factory's Playmaker were found to be completely different in their characterization. Similarly, while Music Factory celebrated the pursuit of money and fame, Class of 3000 was about the love of music and creativity. And with that, the case was dismissed. However, this wouldn't be the only time Cartoon Network got sued. But first, I need to make a quick phone call. 212-544. Carry the 1.
World Record Headquarters, can I help you?
He's the person he is today because he came under the wrath of Bill Mitchell. The all-around most seasoned person in the hot sauce chicken wing industry? Yeah, for sure.
Yes, go ahead. Stroke the beard of Garrett Bobby Ferguson.
You don't become a world champion. It's in your DNA.
Oh, boo yourselves!
He's a very devious person. He works things out to his end very well.
There's not somebody who encompasses all of those areas like me that I've ever met. Not even Helen of Troy had that much attention. And people ask me what my handle is, what my 3 initials are. I mean, come on.
Mr. America himself, Billy Mitchell. The man is one of the most infamous individuals in the history of classic arcade games. He's held high scores in Pac-Man and Donkey Kong, with the latter leading to controversy over the legitimacy of his score. This controversy, however, wouldn't be the only thing that would lead to him being slightly divisive. In 2003, MTV's hit documentary series True Life would release an episode featuring Mitchell called I Am a Gamer. The episode would portray him as being a brash and kinda narcissistic personality, which would only be further built on in 2007's King of Kong, a documentary that portrayed Mitchell as the antagonist in a competition of high scores. These portrayals would end up helping to inspire a character for a little show called Regular Show. Season 2, Episode 7 of Regular Show, titled High Score, featured the first appearance of Garrett Bobby Ferguson. The character was an obvious reference to Billy Mitchell in his appearance and connection to arcade games. I mean, just take Billy Mitchell's head off his body and boom! Garrett Bobby Ferguson. But Billy Mitchell didn't take too kindly to this portrayal, so he did what anyone else in this video would do. He sued. And thus began 2015's Billy Mitchell versus the Cartoon Network Incorporated, the worst crossover fighter since DC versus Mortal Kombat. Straight from the get, however, Billy's case was pretty flimsy, as he was unable to point out any specific similarities between himself and the character. Instead, he chose to note his recognizable long black hair and beard. And he also claimed that Garrett Bobby Ferguson used certain expressions and call words that are unique to Billy Mitchell.
Now who holds that record again? Oh yeah, me!
In his words, the actions of this character make me look like some sort of monster or creature with no heart or decency. This is simply not me. And he was right. It wasn't him.
I'm Garrett Bobby Ferguson.
You see, US law tends to rely on precedents, and in this case, there was one. Winter v. DC Comics. The case revolved around renowned musicians Johnny and Edgar Winter, suing DC Comics over the characters Johnny and Edgar Autumn, two half-man, half-worm characters that served as homages to the musicians. The Winters claimed that DC was appropriating their likeness, and that the comics featuring the characters falsely portrayed them as vile, depraved, stupid, cowardly, subhuman individuals who engage in wanton acts of violence, murder, and bestiality for pleasure, and who should be killed. Well, I've got news for you. This argument didn't pass. To determine if the Winters had a case, the court applied the transformative use test, which asks whether or not a defendant's use of a plaintiff's likeness is merely a copy or imitation, or if they add something new with a further purpose or different character, altering the first with new expression, meaning, or message. Basically, is the usage a copy-paste, or do they change it in some meaningful way? The court found that, although the fictional characters are less than subtle evocations of Johnny and Edgar Winter, the books do not depict the plaintiffs literally, as they are distorted for purposes of lampoon, parody, or caricature. You know, because the Winters aren't actually half worm. Unless... As such, a fan of the Winters wouldn't accept the drawings of the Autumn brothers as suitable replacements for the pictures of the Winters. Now a photo of both of them? Now that's something I'd want on my wall. Oh, yeah. So, how does the case involving one half of the hit album Mission Earth affect our boy Billy Mitchell? Well, the court ended up applying the same transformative use test to this case. The results...
You are not the boss.
Since the character was found to be transformative, Regular Show's use of the character was deemed okay under the First Amendment. USA! 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 As for the specific rulings on the character, it was found that GBF and Billy Mitchell have quite a few differences. For one, Billy Mitchell isn't from space, nor is he a floating head. He also doesn't explode when he loses his record title, though that would have made for a more interesting ending to King of Kong. But since the crew of Regular Show were able to create something new based off of Billy Mitchell's likeness, and he was unable to state a claim where relief could be granted, the case was dismissed. Now, let's throw it back.
The right of custom brings us together.
Max, realizing he's in trouble.
Let's take a stab at your mom.
These electronic cartoons found...
I want you to kill Peter Parker.
I like turtles.
Welcome to Jet Records.
2007. Apple's releasing the iPhone, people are quoting I Can Has Cheeseburger, and Family Guy is airing its 6th season. Oh, and it's also getting sued. 3 times. First, we have Burnett versus 20th Century Fox Film Corp. Who is Burnett, you may be asking? Or maybe you're not. Maybe no one is. Maybe I've just been sitting here talking to myself this whole time. But if you were, Burnett, or more specifically Carol Burnett, is a Tony and Emmy-winning actress, comedian, singer, and songwriter. She's best known for her show The Carol Burnett Show, a sketch comedy show that ran for 11 years.
But Slayer,
you might be saying,
comedy show? What could a lover of comedy have against Family Guy? A show that has all the things that can make us laugh and cry.
Well, she didn't like that they made fun of one of her characters. On The Carol Burnett Show, Burnett has a reoccurring character known as the Charwoman. For those of us who don't eat beans for breakfast,
USA! USA! USA!
A Charwoman is basically a maid or a janitor. As for Family Guy, the Charwoman was used as part of a cutaway gag in the episode Peterotica.
Wow, you usually expect these places to be dirty.
Nah, it's pretty clean. Carol Burnett works part-time as a janitor.
You know, when she tugged her ear at the end of that show, she was really saying goodnight to her mom.
I wonder what she tugged to say goodnight to her dad. Oh!
For Burnett, she felt that Family Guy had done this joke to get revenge on her for not letting them use her personal theme song.
You know, that's my song.
Yes, it is your...
As for the basis of her court case, however, Burnett and her lawyers claimed that Family Guy had infringed on her copyright and had created material that could either defame her and the character, or got some viewers to mistakenly believe that she was associated with the show. The damages? $2 million. What were Peter Griffin and the gang to do? Well, they brought forth a special motion to strike Burnett's claims under California's anti-SLAPP statute. Anti-SLAPP laws, as the name implies, are laws that are meant to counter slaps. So, you aren't allowed to slap people in court? Well, not exactly. I mean, I don't think you can slap people in court. Let me look this up.
Want to write a letter to President Clinton?
Well, seeing as slapping someone can get you sued, I'm just gonna assume no. However, that's not the type of slap we're talking about here. SLAP stands for Strategic Lawsuits Against Public Participation. Slaps tend to be used to silence critics by making them spend money to defend themselves in court. The goal isn't necessarily to win the court case, but to make the defendant have to fold due to the overwhelming monetary and time costs of court procedures. As such, there are anti-slap laws in place to help counter these anti-free speech measures.
USA! USA! USA!
In this case, however, the special motion would be found moot by the court. But as we all know, Family Guy is still around doing the same shtick over a decade and a half later. So, how did they survive this lawsuit? Well, they brought up the friend of any YouTuber that's done a think piece or a review. Fair use. To determine if the use of someone else's copyrighted material is fair use, we have to look at the Copyright Act of 1976. Under this act, a few different factors are considered to determine whether fair use is at play. 1. What was the purpose and character of the work? Does the new work directly copy the original, or does it add something to transform it? 2. What is the nature of the copyrighted work? Is it fictional or non-fictional? How much creativity went into the work? 3. What amount of the copyrighted work was used and how substantial was said portion? 4. What is the effect of the use on the potential market for the copyrighted material? Concerning the first part, Family Guy argued that it fell under the umbrella of parody, something that Carol Burnett and her team took issue with. You see, they felt that Family Guy wasn't parodying the Charwoman character, but Carol Burnett herself. Their reasoning? Well, Quagmire refers to her not as Charwoman, but as Carol Burnett.
Carol Burnett works part-time as a janitor.
Likewise, they made a joke about Carol Burnett tugging her ear at the end of the show, an action that the Charwoman didn't do. Because of all this, they argued it couldn't be possible that this should be considered transformative. And their final nail in Family Guy's coffin? Charwomen can work at porn shops too.
And good night, bang!
Truly progressive beyond their years. But even so, they felt that the target of the joke was Burnett, her family, and her wholesome image instead of the Charwoman. This argument did not fly. You see, between the years of 1993 and 1994, there was a Supreme Court case known as Campbell via Cuff Rose Music, Inc. The lawsuit involved a Cuff Rose Music suing the rap group 2 Live Crew, creators of such hit songs as We Want Some Pussy, Hoochie Mama, Me So Horny, Pop That Pussy, Who's Doing Who, Hell Yeah, Work That Body, A Typical Sex Thing, Fuck 'em, Oh, Stop Playing, Pigs Fuckin', Fuck 'em Intro, Swallow This Nut, Pussy and Dick Thing, Dirty Nursery Rhymes, Get It Girl, The Fuck Shop, Do Wah Diddy, Shake a Lil Something, Original Street Mix Nasty. The crown of these pieces was their parody track, Pretty Woman, a parody of Ray Orbison's Oh, Pretty Woman. If you couldn't tell from the titles of their other tracks, this parody was pretty fucking raunchy. But as part of the Supreme Court's decision, they ruled that how tasteful a parody is doesn't factor into whether or not it's fair use. So, there goes Burnett's argument about targeting her wholesomeness. Family Guy also pointed out that it didn't matter if Burnett was the target or not. The clip of the joke showed an animated character that resembled the Charwoman, next to XXX movies and blow-up dolls, in a manner that comes across as ridiculous, all to make a joke about her as a public figure. As such, the court found that portrayal to be parody, and thus fair use. So, what about the second part? Well, because, actually, that part doesn't really help in parody cases, so it doesn't matter. But what about part 3? Burnett and her legal team felt that Family Guy had taken more than what they needed to evoke the Charwoman's image. In her view, the character was a near carbon copy of the Charwoman, which, you know, is an interesting statement when you think about how she also argued that they weren't parodying the Charwoman. You know, it's just interesting is all.
Who the hell cares?
Again, we have precedents to save the day. Oh, I'm being handed a message. It says, "Live from New York, it's Saturday night!" Yes! Even something as sacred and clairvoyant as SNL isn't safe from lawsuits. In this case, SNL was brought into the firing line in 1980's Ellesmere Music v. National Broadcasting Co. The case focused on SNL's skit, Sodom Chamber of Commerce. The skit parodied a publicity relations campaign that New York City was pushing at the time to improve the city's image.
I live in Brooklyn, but I love New York.
But the part that came under scrutiny was the skit's parody of the campaign's theme tune, I Love New York. And while I too love New York,
I live in Brooklyn, but I love New York.
Both I and the court agreed that the lawsuit was pretty baseless. The court felt that the skit didn't use more of the song than was necessary, and that parody is entitled to conjure up the original to effectively poke humor at it. In Family Guy's case, the court brought up that the show didn't take more than what it needed for the joke, and even then, they felt that Family Guy could have used even more if they had wanted to. The show's joke only lasts about 18 seconds, and in less than 5 of those seconds, the charwoman is actually visible. Truly, Family Guy did more than they needed to. And then there's part 4 of determining if something's fair use or not. What is the effect on the market? Well, if you were worried that consumers were going to find Family Guy's use of the charwoman as a fulfilling replacement for the original, I have good news for you. The court felt that an 18-second joke of the charwoman surrounded by blow-up dolls and pornos wouldn't act as a marketplace replacement. Yay! But what if Family Guy's parody ended up destroying the Carol Burnett show? Well, according to the court, that doesn't matter. In their eyes, that could very well be Family Guy's motive. But that doesn't matter in the slightest. In order to protect social and literary criticism, this can't be considered when dictating if something's fair use or not. And with all of that, Family Guy's joke was found to be fair use, and part of Burnett's claim for relief was dismissed without leave to amend. But we're not done yet, now are we? As I mentioned earlier, Burnett was afraid that viewers would mistakenly believe that she was associated with the show. That argument didn't get her very far. The court acknowledged that the show is known for its lampooning of celebrities and pop culture. With that precedent in place, and with the nature of the joke, no reasonable viewer would believe that squeaky clean Carol Burnett had decided to get in bed with the likes of Family Guy. And thus, Family Guy was able to successfully dismiss the lawsuit. Though, I do think it's funny that the court tried to end in Burnett's good graces. Like, they lampooned quote-unquote new media as relying on crude and insensitive jokes and having no self-imposed restraint. To go even further, they said that creating a character like the Charwoman took much more creativity than using the character in a parody would. Excuse me? Have they not seen the creative masterpiece that is Greased Up Deaf Guy? Absolute masterpiece. And, like, don't get me wrong, I'm not a fan of Family Guy, but God, does it all come across as so fucking prissy. Anyways, why else did Family Guy get sued? I need a Jew?
I need a Jew.
In 2003, Family Guy would release the episode When You Wish Upon a Weinstein. What do you get? A casting couch?
When You Wish Upon a Weinstein, the episode that Fox refused to air because they felt it was too risky.
In the episode, however, Peter sings a song titled I Need a Jew, a parody of the song When You Wish Upon a Star from Walt Disney's Pinocchio. Fun fact, this episode also has another connection to Disney. It was directed by Dan Povenmire, one of the co-creators of Phineas and Ferb. It truly is a small world after all. But Bourne Corporation, owners of When You Wish Upon a Star, didn't take a liking to their copyrighted song being parodied. In their view, I Need a Jew was a blatant copy of When You Wish Upon a Star, just with anti-Semitic lyrics. So they ended up suing Family Guy 4 years after the episode released. Yeah, they actually hadn't noticed the parody till one of their employees found the clip on YouTube. Much like me in 2007, I like to think this employee was just browsing Family Guy funny moments, stumbled across the clip, and went, wait a minute, that's our song! And thus began a new Family Guy funny moment. In court. As their defense, Family Guy did the same thing they did with Carol Burnett. They claimed parody. In their eyes, their joke poked fun at and commented on the innocent and wholesome worldview that When You Wish Upon a Star presents. By also parodying a song that was heavily associated with Walt Disney and his company, they aimed at commenting on Walt Disney's alleged anti-Semitism. In the court's opinion, this was totally what they did. Yeah, the court agreed with Family Guy on this one. They felt that by juxtaposing the saccharine sweetness of When You Wish Upon a Star with Peter's nonsensical ramblings of Jewish stereotypes, it commented on the childishness of trying to view race through a categorical lens, much like Wishing Upon a Star. Pairing the song with visuals that also paid homage to Pinocchio, the court felt it was clear that Family Guy was trying to add commentary to the scene and song, rather than just copying the music to gain attention or avoid having to make something wholly original. But what about that last part? You know, about Walt Disney hating Jewish people? Well, according to Bourne, they couldn't possibly be making commentary about Walt Disney being anti-Semitic, because they didn't have any concrete evidence that he hated Jewish people. Bourne also felt that while When You Wish Upon a Star was occasionally used by the Walt Disney Corporation as a theme song, that doesn't mean that the public associates it with the Walt Disney Company, or Walt Disney himself. Going even further, Bourne felt that the public also didn't associate the Disney Company with Walt Disney. They felt that people don't associate Disney the company with Walt Disney the man. Disney the company, Disney the man? What? Even Seth MacFarlane was confused by this, stating,
I mean, the man was the company in so many ways. Yeah. I mean, his name is on everything. His signature is on everything. Walt Disney. Yeah. I mean, the Disney Corporation has his name on it. Seth MacFarlane.
And the court agreed, finding it reasonable to assume that Walt Disney was associated with Walt Disney the company. They also felt that it was reasonable to assume that the parody was aiming to comment on Walt's alleged racism. They even Google searched Disney Jew. The first two results? The straight dope. Was Walt Disney a fascist? And did Walt Disney hate Jews? Part 1 video. But none of that matters. Literally. While Bourne felt that all of this was a big deal, the court deemed that neither of those things needed to be proven true for I Need a Jew to be considered parody. All that matters is that it can be reasonably perceived as parody. But determining that something is a parody isn't enough to determine if something is fair use or not. For that, we have to return to the four-factor analysis, which we already went over during the Burnett trial, so I won't be doing that again. For the first factor, the court found that both songs were incredibly different in tone and message. While both songs are about characters wishing for something, their wishes couldn't be any more different, which I don't know if I can agree with that. I always felt what Geppetto was really asking for in his time of need was an Epstein. Even so, the song was deemed transformative, so the first factor ruled in favor of Family Guy. Just like last time and in most parody cases, the second factor doesn't matter. This brings us to factor 3. Did Family Guy only take what was necessary from the original to parody it? I Need a Jew was written by Walter Murphy, a composer who's worked on shows and movies such as Family Guy, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, American Dad, Fillmore, Ted, The A-Team, The Cleveland Show, Mrs. America, Ted 2, and Raw Force.
Raw Force.
When Murphy wrote the original draft of I Need a Jew, Seth MacFarlane and David Zuckerman felt it needed to be changed to make the allusion to the original song clearer. Murphy felt that changing the song would create something that wasn't unique, as was required under his contract with Fox. Nevertheless, he ended up making the changes. According to the court, this dispute over how much from the original they should take displayed that the Family Guy team was aiming to take only what they needed. As such, the third factor ruled in favor of Family Guy. And lastly, what are the market ramifications caused by I Need a Jew? Yeah, the court didn't think there was any potential for I Need a Jew to be seen as a suitable substitute for When You Wish Upon a Star. However, Bourne tried to tackle the fourth prong from a different approach. In their view, they felt that all uses of copyrighted work through a fair use rationale would deprive the owner of said copyright of licensing fees. Shit sounds like the rationale for most YouTube copyright strikes. However, this excuse didn't really get them anywhere. The reason why parodists don't have to get licenses from copyright holders is that if they did, it'd be really easy for copyright holders to just say no, thus making it harder to criticize the work. So, with Bourne's lame duck of an excuse and the market ramifications being incredibly clear to anyone and everyone, the court ruled that the fourth factor also weighed in Family Guy's favor. With all of the applicable fair use factors favoring Family Guy, the court ruled in their favor, thus ending the case.
Can't touch me.
But 2007 had one more lawsuit heading Family Guy's way. And while the last one had to do with Judaism, this one had to do with Christianity. Kinda. Many greats have been involved in Christian sects. Athanasius the Great, Saint Abraham the Great of Kendunja, and, of course, the Great Metrano. The Great Metrano earned such a coveted distinguishment through his historical act of appearing on late-night talk shows and in the second and third entries of the Police Academy movies. During the former, Art Metrano would often do faux magic acts, which made fun of the goofiness and the lameness of typical magic acts, hence him being referred to as the Great. One of these magic bits would end up being adopted by another one of the greats. In the Family Guy film Stewie Griffin, The Untold Story, Stewie from the future remarks on going back in time to see Jesus. The song and dance Jesus performs are nearly identical to those performed by Metrano in his acts. And as such, Metrano brought forth a lawsuit in 2007, and then Metrano dropped the lawsuit, and then he brought it back a year later. Why did he drop it? Hell if I know! But at first glance, you might think that this case could easily be dismissed in the same style that Burnett's was. It's Family Guy, making fun of someone else's shtick and using it to make commentary on the individual. Even McFarlane and the crew thought that this would be the case, but it wasn't. Just like the other two lawsuits, the four-factor analysis of fair use was brought into effect. For the first factor, Family Guy argued that the bit was parody and that it made Metrano and his routine look ridiculous, much like what had been the case during Burnett's lawsuit. However, unlike Burnett, the court felt that the butt of the joke wasn't Metrano, but Jesus and his followers. Unlike the cutaway gag involving Burnett, the bit from Stewie didn't portray Metrano in any way. Amongst this, the court felt that the scene did nothing to critique or comment on Metrano or his humor. Instead, the court felt that Fox merely used Metrano as their uncompensated comedy writer, a fate shared by many Hollywood interns. Through this interpretation of the joke, the court felt that the first factor didn't side with Family Guy.
You know, that's just like, your opinion, man.
This ruling does bring up an interesting concept about courts ruling on how transformative a piece of media is. As professor and research dean of the University of Houston's Law Center, Dave Fagundes put it in regards to cases like these, it requires judges to act as literary critics. I should note that this quote is not a Fagundes original, but is instead a quote from someone else. Who's that someone else? Not even Fagundes remembered. Fagundes, however, did have some original remarks about the case. In his view, the scene in question did translate as parody, with the focus of the parody being both Metrano and Jesus. With Jesus performing the act, not only does it lampoon the idea of Jesus' miracles, but it also makes Metrano's act look lame in comparison. Granted, I think that was the point of Metrano's act. Whatever. And even if it wasn't technically parody, Fagundes did feel it was transformative, in that it took Metrano's bit and changed the context of it from a campy 60s comedy act into a depiction of Jesus that would have gotten me to read the Bible in Sunday school. All of this is to say that these cases do tend to come down to interpretation. But how were the other three factors interpreted? Well, the second factor doesn't matter. For the third factor, Fox's main argument lied in the brevity of the segment. It's a 20-second joke in an 88-minute long film. However, the length of the joke doesn't really matter. What does matter is how much of the copyrighted work had been utilized. In this case, the joke copied around 20 seconds of Metrano's act, with the tune and hand gestures almost being one-to-one. While under different circumstances this might have been okay, it didn't matter to the court here, since they'd already decided that the joke wasn't parody. Thus, the third factor also ruled against Family Guy. And last, but certainly not least, what was the potential market effect caused by Jesus doing a 60s comedy routine? Well, the court had no clue, and they just moved on from it. And thus, the court found that Jesus doing silly things with his hands wasn't parody.
But do not abandon all hope, ye who watch animation domination. For this case wasn't over yet.
For you see, part of Metrano's lawsuit was that Family Guy had infringed upon the Lanham Act. What is the Lanham Act? You're more than likely asking. Well, it's the Trademark Act of 1946. Right. Well, basically, it established the precedents for when the owners of trademarks would be entitled to federal judicial protection against infringement. In this case, Family Guy argued that Metrano's Lanham Act claims failed because Stewie Griffin, The Untold Story, was protected by the First Amendment. Much like the transformative use test, Lanham Acts have a test of their own in order to determine if something is protected by the First Amendment. This test is referred to as the Rogers test, and is derived from Rogers v. Grimaldi, a case involving Ginger Rogers and the film Ginger and Fred. The film is about Italian impersonators of the famous dancing duo Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire, reuniting and hijinks ensuing. The real-life Ginger Rogers took issue with the film, feeling that it violated her Lanham Act trademark rights by making it appear like she was directly involved with the film. When the case was being reviewed by the Second Circuit, they developed a two-pronged test to determine whether the Lanham Act could be applied. Prong 1, does the usage of the trademark have artistic relevance? Prong 2, does the usage mislead as to the source of the work? In the original case, it was found that the film Ginger and Fred hadn't violated Rogers' Lanham Act rights, thus establishing a new precedent in determining First Amendment rights in regards to using trademarks. Metrano v. 20th Century Fox would put this test to the test. But not before mentioning some other cases that acted as precedents. Why am I mentioning these cases? Well, I mean, the first one has to do with Aqua's hit song Barbie Girls, so how could I not want to talk about that? In 1997, Mattel sued MCA Records, feeling that the title of the song Barbie Girl infringed on their trademark. For the first prong, the court felt that it lied in favor of Aqua, as the usage of Barbie was relevant to the song, since it was about Barbie. For the second prong, the court felt that the song didn't suggest that it was produced by Mattel, so it wasn't considered misleading. As such, Mattel's Lanham Act claim failed. But while Barbies are okay to touch and play, you know who aren't? Strippers. I think maybe it comes down to the strip club's rules. I don't know. My only interactions with strip clubs are in GTA, which is the subject of our other case precedent. In 2006, Rockstar was sued by the owners of the Playpen Gentlemen's Club, due to San Andreas having an homage to the club in the form of the Pigpen. The owners of the club felt that the Pigpen infringed on their trademark, and thus sued, meaning we've got to go back to the prongs. For the first one, the court felt that including the Pigpen had some artistic relevance to creating a parody of East LA. And for the second, the court felt that the game was not misleading about the source of the work. How so? Well, the court felt it was reasonable to assume that the strip club wasn't developing video games, nor was Rockstar running a strip club. So, how do we apply the same legal test that's been used for strip clubs and the song that's haunted me for nearly my entire existence on Family Guy? In Family Guy's argument, they felt that using Metrano's bit was artistically relevant because it spotlights the human tendency to place famous and historical figures on pedestals and exaggerate their abilities. And while the court felt that the joke didn't lampoon Metrano at all, but instead poked fun at Jesus and his followers, they did feel it had some level of artistic relevance. First prong? Check. The court also felt that no one would reasonably believe that Metrano had produced or sponsored Stewie Griffin, The Untold Story. Plus, the scene itself is quite incidental to the movie, as it only takes up 20 seconds of its runtime, and it isn't the main selling point of the film. And with that, it was determined that the film wasn't misleading, and the film was protected under the First Amendment. Thus, Metrano's Lanham Act claims were dismissed.
With prejudice!
But even with the Lanham Act claims dismissed, the court had still ruled that the joke wasn't protected under parody. So, could Metrano see any monetary relief? No. At least, not under the Copyright Act. You see, Metrano didn't file the copyright for his bits until August 9th, 2007, a whole 683 days after Stewie Griffin, The Untold Story was released. Because the copyright was filed after the infringement, Metrano wasn't warranted any reparations. However, Metrano argued that after the copyright had been filed, Fox had distributed the film in other forms outside of its original DVD distribution. This lame duck excuse didn't get Metrano anywhere, as there isn't anything significantly different from the DVD release versus Family Guy on 2009 Netflix.
Peanut brittle.
Wanna watch a movie? With all this out of the way, the court officially deemed the case vacated. And now, we can finally stop talking about Family Guy. Except, there may be one last part to the Metrano case. I'm not sure if this is true or not, but this article states that in 2010, there was a settlement between Fox and Metrano for an undisclosed amount. I say I'm not sure because I haven't been able to find this info anywhere else. So, believe what you will. Okay, now we're done talking about Family Guy. So, what case are we going to end this romp of a video with? I initially thought about talking about the semi-recent court cases in Russia that saw shows and movies such as Akira, Death Note, and Happy Tree Friends being banned in the country. Why? Because the Russian government fears they'd harm children's spiritual and moral education and development. Truly the most heinous thing the Russian government has done this decade. However, there really isn't much to talk about, outside of what was banned and how for several years there was a group of Russian parents lobbying for the banning of Death Note after a Russian teen had committed suicide. But I felt that was a little too depressing of a note to end this video on, so instead, let's talk about animators not getting paid enough. Yeah! It all started in a distant land called Silicon Valley, unless you live on the West Coast. Then I guess it isn't all that distant for you. I've only ever lived in Ohio and New York City, so that's pretty much the other side of the world for me.
USA! USA! USA!
Ohio style.
But in the mid-2000s, a cabal was brewing.
I don't want to create a paper trail over which we can be sued later.
This is Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, talking to his senior VP for business operations, Shona Brown. Well, the voice wasn't literally him, but you get the idea. Sketchy shit is going on. And what is that sketchy shit, you may be asking? Wage theft. You see, several major tech companies got the brilliant idea of sharing their wage info with each other. Weird flex, but okay. Why would competing companies ever want to do that? Doesn't that make it easier to outbid each other?
Yeah.
Well, there's no outbidding, if no bidding ever occurs. Alongside this info, these companies also promise not to cold call each other's employees in attempts to get them to jump ship and come work with them. All of this worked in conjunction so that these companies could pay tech employees as little as possible, while also not having to worry about their talent pools being dipped into by their competition. Knowledge of these happenings would be dug up in 2010, after the Obama administration launched a Department of Justice antitrust investigation. It'd be revealed that several major companies were involved, including Google, Intel, Adobe, Intuit, and last but certainly not least, Apple. In fact, Apple's CEO Steve Jobs would be one of the primary figureheads for the scheme that's now known as Techtopus. Jobs would be the one to bring on Bruce Chizen, CEO of Adobe, into the plot. Jobs also recruited Eric Schmidt with the help of Bill Campbell, a member of Apple's board of directors and one of Schmidt's official advisors. And while Techtopus is a beast that I could do a whole video on, I want to focus specifically on the part that affects the animation industry. This is a video about animation lawsuits after all. So, where did Jobs get this idea from? Well, none other than the man who watches me sleep at night, George Lucas. In 1983, Lucas and his soon-to-be ex-wife, film editor Marcia Lucas, were going through a divorce. A divorce that would require George Lucas to pay Marcia as part of their divorce settlement. To get this money, George opted to sell Lucasfilm's computer animation division. Steve Jobs would end up buying the division, which would go on to become Pixar in 1986. Around the time Pixar went independent, Lucas became vocal about how he felt that Pixar and Lucasfilm shouldn't compete for employees. Pixar and Lucasfilm would come to their own wage reduction agreement that's very similar to the ordeal I discussed earlier. No cold calling, and that all job offers would be final to prevent bidding wars, which would have driven wages up. Lucas stated that this was necessary, as Lucasfilm would have gone bankrupt had he not done shady shit. And even if his intentions were truly noble, which, knowing Lucas's love of money, I kind of have a hard time believing, there's no doubt in my mind that this deal was the blueprint for Techtopus. But this wouldn't be the end of Pixar's involvement. Not by a long shot. Meet Ed Catmull, one of Pixar's co-founders alongside Steve Jobs. Catmull would be one of the primary players in the wage fixing happening in the animation industry. Under Catmull's stewardship, various studios would agree to work together to suppress their employees' wages, including DreamWorks, Lucasfilm, Image Movers, Walt Disney Animation Studios, and Orphanage. Catmull would also attempt to bring more studios into the fold, such as Sony Animation, who would initially refuse his offer in 2004. 3 years later, after Pixar had been purchased by Disney, Catmull approached Disney Studios president Alan Berman and Disney's head of HR Marjorie Randolph to voice his desire for the cabal to punish Sony for the refusal to play ball. In fact, Catmull would be questioned about this stance in his deposition during the initial Techtopus scandal.
You were cheering on somebody else to go after Sony?
I was pissed at them. That is true.
And before you think,
good on Sony for not joining in,
they eventually did. They even double-dipped with both Sony Pictures Animation and Sony Pictures Imageworks. So there's that. Hell, even John Lasseter knew that all of this was happening. Truly the darkest thing Lasseter's kept secret. But what about the lawsuit? I mean, again, this is a video about animation lawsuits. Well, in 2014, former DreamWorks animation character effects artist Robert Nitsch would file the initial lawsuit. Shortly after, he was joined by George Akano, a former digital and lighting artist at Rhythm and Hues, and David Wentworth, a former production engineer and computer graphics supervisor at Image Movers Digital. The case would go before District Court Judge Lucy Coe, who also oversaw the initial Techtopus case. In response to the lawsuit, Disney, Sony Pictures, and Blue Sky all filed a motion for Coe to dismiss the case. Their argument? We don't do that anymore. Yeah, you heard me right. They didn't deny that they participated in wage fixing, but that's the old them. They've changed now. They wouldn't do that now. They found God now.
I know it's only been a week since you outed me, but I've been changing.
The studios also felt that the lawsuit was futile, as the lawsuit was outside the statute of limitations, seeing as there was no proof that they'd performed any wage thefts after September 8th, 2010, which, as you may remember, is around the time the Department of Justice began its antitrust investigation. Kinda hard to participate in illegal practices when you're actively being investigated, which the studios even admitted. So, how did Coe feel about the studio's arguments about why the case should be dismissed? Well, she agreed. In her view, the 4-year statute of limitations began during the time the plaintiffs could prove that they were being affected by wage fixing, rather than during the period after they discovered that wage fixing might be occurring. And in April of 2015, she dismissed the case. Well, thanks for watching the video. Remember to like, comment, ring that bell, and subscribe to keep up with all the epic Slayer Runes vlogging content. Here's what you've been missing out on.
Joe. Please, God. Please say something. Please speak. Please, God. Please speak. Come on, dude. Please. Please say something.
Oh, okay. So that's nowhere near the end of the story. So what happened next? Well, the only way Nitch and crew could overturn Co's initial ruling is if they could prove that affirmative actions had been performed to mislead employees about the wage fixing, such as, I don't know, trying not to leave a paper trail behind.
I don't want to create a paper trail over which we can be sued later.
Oh yeah, like that. Regarding any discussions about wage fixing, the studios limited them to in-person meetings or phone calls. If any emails needed to be sent, they stuck to personal email accounts to prevent the discussions from being discovered, with Lucasfilm going as far as to make it a requirement that their lawyers were to be notified if any emails were revealed. Affirmative action can also take the form of giving employees dishonest explanations for compensation decisions, such as when Catmull and Laster lied to their employees why they were only receiving a 3.5% raise after the release of both Wall-E and Up. Catmull and Lassiter stated that it was so that the studio could fund additional benefits while giving them stronger job security. George Lucas would have been proud.
You're gonna be so proud?
Proud?
But hey, at least those artists got a cereal bar, right? Rice checks. With the lawsuit revised to include proof that the studios had intentionally covered up and misled employees about any wage fixing, it was presented once more to Judge Lucy Co in August of 2015. With the revisions in place, Co decided to allow the lawsuit to continue.
Congratulations, you found us.
On December 9th, 2015, Co ordered Pixar and Lucasfilm to hand over unredacted versions of documents they had presented in the initial Techtopus case by December 16th. It was expected that the studios would attempt to appeal this order, and a hearing date was set. However, that date would never come. Not because the world ended or anything, but because the hearing would be scrapped, as the studios and the plaintiffs had come to an agreement. What was the agreement? Genuinely? I have no idea. It doesn't say in any of the documents or news articles I found, so... But cracks in the cabal would begin to form on March 31st, when Blue Sky would be the first studio to propose a settlement. The amount? $5.95 million. And this money wouldn't just go to workers who had been employed by Blue Sky, but anyone that had been affected by the wage-fixing scandal. On top of this, Blue Sky agreed to not cooperate with the other studios, and that they wouldn't oppose the class certification. This class certification would occur in late May of 2015, thus defining who all were covered by the lawsuits and could seek reclamations. Shortly before this, Sony would also throw their hat into the ring, offering $13 million in settlement. Disney and DreamWorks, however, weren't going to go down without a fight. And boy, were they packing some verbal heat.
Hey, Judge Co, remember when you threw out the case last year for being outside the statute of limitations? What if you did that again?
Yeah, they literally tried to do the same argument again, even after it had already been addressed. Now, to their credit, they did add to their argument by stating that many artists that would be part of the certified class knew about the wage fixing. For example, they mentioned emails between Pixar employees that mentioned a gentleman's agreement between Pixar and another studio. They also brought up a meeting between Pixar's general manager and several interns that had been recorded and uploaded to the company's intranet. In the video, the so-called gentleman's agreement is mentioned. And since the video was available for all employees to see, that means they could have learned about the wage fixing. Now, as someone who has worked for some major companies with their own servers filled with videos and files, there is no way I was watching everything that was on there. So I can't imagine that every Pixar employee saw this video. But that actually doesn't matter, as Judge Co would point out that 3 months after the video was uploaded, it was edited to remove any references to the anti-poaching agreement. Co also felt that a lot of the evidence the studios presented was too general. and whatever specific examples they had were too few in number. And with that, the Cabal's last-ditch effort was thwarted, and the rest of the settlements began to trickle in. Next up was DreamWorks, which offered $50 million as settlement, which brought the total settlement amount to nearly $69 million. Nice. However, DreamWorks continued to deny that they did anything wrong, and that they really just didn't want to go to trial. The same excuse I use when I have to pay for speeding tickets. And then in early 2017, Disney, Pixar, and Lucasfilm agreed to pay $100 million as settlement. With a final fairness hearing proposed for March 9th, 2017, the total settlement amount was brought to nearly $170 million. The settlement would begin distribution on July 9th, 2018, and would go out to over 10,000 workers, thus bringing an end to an era of corruption in the animation industry. Now, this isn't to say that there isn't still corruption in the animation industry. One doesn't need to look far to see that there's still a ways to go, but every victory matters in the battle for workers' rights. And that brings us to the end of this segment, and the end of this video. Honestly, there are a lot of nitty-gritty details I didn't mention in this case and in some of the others. If you want to read up more on them, I've left a link to my sources in the description of this video. If you want any more videos like this one, or if there are any animation cases you'd want me to cover, let me know in the comments. You can also follow me on social media to keep up to date with what I'm working on. Here are those. But I will say I don't plan on just focusing on animation going forward. I'll probably still talk about it. It's one of my fucking favorite things, alongside music, video games, professional wrestling. So it's still gonna be present, but it won't be the sole focus of this channel going forward. But what are those other topics? Whatever they are, I'm sure they'll be riveting.